Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I am your host, Kaydra. Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm so happy you guys are here. Because it is Christmas and I am traveling this holiday season, I am taking a little bit of a break, but don't worry, I wanted you guys to have something to binge in case you are traveling, if you're stuck, hopefully not, but stuck on a really long plane ride, you have a layover, you're taking a car drive to wherever you need to be and you're just stuck in traffic. So you are going to hear 4 rewind Christmas themed episodes. We're talking about Krampus, UFO sightings on Christmas, a serial killer that was a mall Santa Claus, all kinds of different things. And I really hope that you guys enjoy these remastered rewind episodes. We'll be back to our normal scheduled programming next week. I'll also put the timestamps in the show notes in case you are wanting to just listen to one specific story. And just super quick, I did want to shout out B, one of my patrons. B, thank you for upgrading to the Perplexed Society Supreme Leader tier. And thank you for buying 10 coffees from my Buy Me a Coffee link and wishing me a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. That is super, super nice. You guys can always do that if the Christmas spirit finds you. And it's super helpful. That helps keep the show going. And B joined the highest tier, which means she's going to get a t-shirt very soon. So if any of those perks interest you, you can always go check out patreon.com/perplexity mystery podcast. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into this Christmas marathon. The James Curry film, written by Alex McIntosh. It was never a dull moment's drive. Scotland was, by definition, a beautiful country of inspiring scenery, majesty, and relentless weather. Evie's old hatchback had taken a beating from the rain, and protruding 3 branches that flicked across the windshield on this dark and stormy night, December 1996. A single peppermint sweet flicked between her cheeks, and the imposing view of her desired destination made her belly knot up. Over the winding roads, across the blackened slick of sodden fields, a great stately home rested just next to the shore of one of the most famous bodies of water, Loch Ness. The sole of Evie's aching foot and her red leather boot pressed gently to brake the car to a squeaking halt, stopped in a large puddle created by the elements only that same day. The occasional bolt of lightning sent an illumination that lit the entire landscape. The dark, busy water of the loch, the breaking trees, and the ancient ruins of Urquhart Castle could be seen across the water opposite to this great hall. She wiped the fog from her thick-rimmed glasses and leaned forward to observe the wrought iron gate that lay open. It seemed to invite her into the grounds, while 2 menacing, stone-grotesque heads gazed upon her, the creatures themselves resembling that of the elusive beast itself, the Loch Ness Monster. Outside the confines of the warm car, the winds screamed down in a rapacious gale. No stranger to extreme Scottish weather, she took a swig of something lukewarm from her plastic travel mug before exiting the car, grabbing a small leather satchel from the boot, and walking down the snaking gravel driveway towards the foreboding dark residence. Her grandfather used to tell her there was no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. He had taken that from an old book of Scottish proverbs and lived firmly by it until his death. Her boots crunched the wet gravel, and beads of heavy rain rolled off her hood. She noticed the old Victorian lamps that lit the driveway, coming in just next to the glistening, wet, yet manicured lawns. 2 rooms on the ground floor of the sprawling palace appeared to have lights on. One could be seen lit by the old-fashioned red and greens of bulbs that flickered from a Christmas tree. She thought it was a very similar sight to something you'd see in one of those Hammer horror flicks of the 1970s. Ivy tendrils crept up the walls, pointing to cracks in the roof. The sounds of wind wailing and hissing from the shoreline could penetrate ears a mile away down the narrow path. She grasped the antique iron knocker on the large oak door and banged 3 times. Her grandfather used to say it was the devil's three. He had a superstition about evil coming in threes. A gold plaque encrusted on the brick wall above the postbox proudly read, "The Ordained Society of Loch Ness Monster Hunters." The stiffened hinges on the heavily constructed oak door groaned when it opened and presented a handsome, bearded man in a tartan checkered sweater and a salt and pepper hat. He put Evie in mind of Sean Connery, only with more liver spots. He greeted her with a welcoming warmth. "Let's get you inside and out of the weather, young lass," he politely exclaimed. The wind whistled a gale inside the echoed hallway when the door slammed firmly behind her. She thanked her host and pulled back her hood to view her surroundings. "The drawing room is just down the hallway," the man said. "You can make yourself comfortable in there. Are you a smoker?" "No, I don't smoke," she said with an awkward smile, satchel gripped tightly to her hip. She removed her red raincoat and watched him place it on some Nessie-shaped hangers by an umbrella stand. For a man in his 70s, he moved swiftly and energized. "Pity. I have some excellent cigars I just had arrived this morning from a friend in Nicaragua. Early Christmas present. I'll be with you in a minute. I must make a quick phone call." The wood creaked underneath his strong frame when he hurried down the hallway in his slippers. Evie walked down the opposing large hallway towards the lit room at the end. The water from her sodden boots absorbed by each step on the patterned carpet runner. Each wall sconce lighting the wood-paneled entrance was decorated in dark green and red tinsel. The Yuletide merriment seemed like a facade to the dark history of this place that she questioned in her mind. Along each beautifully wainscoted wall were detailed wood carvings of the mysterious creature, making its way towards the drawing room entrance. The ruby-tinged hardwood floor creaked with every step, even on top of the carpet runner. The sheer grandeur of the place was imposing, and Evie tried not to feel vulnerable. Her prior research had suggested it was just the two of them to meet this evening, but with a place as vast as this, one could never be certain. Every room she passed along the way seemed to have shapes in them, shapes with eyes that watched her move carefully. A gorgeous Christmas tree stood 8 feet tall in the drawing room, wrapped in old-fashioned tinsel, with a Nessie head placed on top in place of the typical star or fairy. Next to the tree, a large open fireplace snapped and crackled with dry wood. The smell of oak, leather, and fine cigar smoke topped off the seemingly relaxed atmosphere. It smirked of monetary tidings. Cozy would have understated the appearance. It looked just like a painting on a Christmas card. Yet Evie was not so smug. She was very much aware of her surroundings and had a bound duty to be on her guard in the presence of this man. Her eyes were quickly drawn to the walls, each a gallery of pictures and photos with an air of mystery dedicated to the Society's supposed findings. Black and white photography, art, newspaper clippings, and even what appeared to be dried reptilian skin samples. A large bureau and chair sat in one corner of the room that featured a crystal whiskey decanter, and behind that, a huge bay window with a wide view of the moonlit loch itself. "It is Miss Gordon, I presume?" The heavy voice inquired stoutly and sent a chill through Evie when he entered the room behind her. "It's Miss Grant, Evelyn Grant," she said. "We spoke on the phone earlier today." The man appeared to be taken aback. "Very good. I'm Dr. Alastair McKendrick," he said, and offered a firm handshake that enveloped hers. "I head the Society. The Society of Ordained, the Ordained Society of Loch Ness Monster Hunters. Long title, I know, and I forget easily. More so in my old age." His charming smile did little to comfort her. She laid down her satchel next to the large leather couch and kept her smaller purse on her within reach of her cold hands. She chewed upon the remains of the bony mint in her mouth and swallowed before scanning the walls in the room and keeping a watchful distance from this man. Dr. McKendrick checked the antique clock on the wall and saw its ticking hands soon to be at the 11 o'clock chime. "It's hard not to be captivated by this room," he said. "It's my favorite in the entire headquarters, and as such, it's where I conduct most of my business. This room is the center, or rather the heart of the house. The mansion itself was donated to the organization by one of our benefactors, Lady Catherine Shaw. I try to let its walls talk and tell the tales of exploits past." Evie's left eye vibrated slightly when she saw the fingernails on her hands chewed down from the sheer nerves upon coming here. She feigned distraction, but that acute, stressing tell was visible. That was until a curiosity did capture her interest on the wall. It was a large painting depicting the giant grayish-brown monster facing down a priest whose expression was fierce and determined. She removed her glasses to wipe away the steam from the room's fiery warmth. "What is this painting supposed to be, Doctor?" she asked. The doctor scratched his beard with social satisfaction, and Evie caught sight of the healed shaving cuts on his face. He loved telling stories, and being invited to enlighten people on a subject he knew everything about provided him with endorphins worthy of spending money on. "This is the beginning of the monster's origins," he said. "Saint Columba is the man in the painting. He was an Irish holy man who came to Scotland in the year 563 AD. He'd been spreading the good word of the Lord to the Pictish tribes from that time, creating a sense of the unity among them, of which those pagan savages sorely lacked. In the year 565 AD, at the banks of the River Ness, a few miles up to the loch's northern end, one of the tribesmen was being buried by the riverbank. St. Columba asked the men what had happened, to which they told him he'd been partially eaten by the large water beast. After being told this, Columba sent one of his own companions out to swim across the river. And lo and behold, a great beast rose from the depths. However, St. Columba was brave and determined. He made the sign of the cross and ordered the monster go back to where it came. It then vanished, never to bother the saint or his tribe ever again. Evie turned from the painting and saw the doctor was standing right next to her. She moved away to gather her bearings and gave a questioning look. "So, it just left?" "Absolutely, yes. The will of God made it so. The tribes believed they all had witnessed a miracle that day, and St. Columba's own legend grew among the church." "And your society of Nessie hunters believed this story?" Dr. McKendrick chuckled dryly with an acid tongue. "Absolutely not. The problem with stories is that the original truth of them eventually dies over time. The original account of St. Columba facing the monster was written over 100 years after the event happened. And after that, for hundreds of years, there was seemingly nothing to write about when it came to the creature." Evie felt the beads of sweat trickle down her head with the remnants of rain. The fireplace was hot, but her feeling of impending dread was getting tougher to mask. "So when did the modern-day sightings occur?" she asked. "There were reports made in the late 1800s of sightings, one of a large creature propelling itself into the dark waters just off the shore. It was only until the 1930s that we had some extremely interesting witness accounts of the monster, such as, in 1933, George Spicer and his wife reported a dragon-like creature crossing the road in front of their motor car, carrying a dead animal in its mouth. Then in 1934, Mr. Arthur Grant described nearly hitting the creature while riding his motorbike down that same stretch of road. This stretch of road being the same one you would have taken coming here tonight. This stretch of road was originally paved in 1933, and therefore has led to many sightings. Before then, nobody came handy to walking that close to the shore down this way. Mind you, like all the stories, the written word can also be unreliable. Once you hear the report, it creates a ripple effect of people seeing fame and fortune, and others who just want some attention to take away from their sad and pathetic lives. In the society, we mean to seek hard proof. The doctor kept his eyes locked onto Evie's at every opportunity, chipping away at that stone wall. "Then I have exactly what you're looking for," she stated firmly. The reason for her visit was about to bear fruit. "You have something to show me in that satchel you packed with you?" "Yes." "What is it?" "Irrefutable evidence of the creature's existence." Dr. McKendrick saw the look in her eyes and paused for a moment. He then made his way over to the desk and poured up a dram of whiskey for himself in a delicate crystal glass. All the while, Evie was sure she heard a thudding noise coming from somewhere upstairs. "Would you care for a glass of Isley's finest?" he offered. "I would love one," she said, knowing it might settle her nerves a bit. Evie listened to that delicate clink of the glass and accepted the warming, neat double to temporarily subside her anxiety. "Excellent choice," the doctor said. "That's the drink of a young lady who has a lot to say." Out of the corner of her scrutiny, she saw a proud smile materialize on the doctor's strong face. A reaction to one of the photos on the wall. She knew he was eager to say something about it, even more so than seeing what she had come here for. She held the whiskey glass to her nose for a second, to sample the smoky scent of the undoubtedly expensive scotch, before measuring the very odd black and white framed photograph of a blurred shape in the water. "This is one of the very first photographs taken of the creature," he said. "The original negative was lost, and this picture has deteriorated over time. Nothing to get excited about anyway." "Why is that?" It's actually a close-up picture of an otter." The doctor spoke with an expression of harshness. "Why is that so important, then?" Evie asked. The doctor did not respond immediately. He was unreadable, almost as though the layers of warmth and hospitality were peeled back to reveal a mold behind the wallpaper, a dirty, disgusting ruination. "This next one here I'm sure you're aware of." It was the first photograph to show the creature's full head and neck above the surface. Evie placed her whiskey glass on the small table next to the couch and rubbed her eyeglasses once again. She recognized the image immediately of the infamous surgeon's photograph, a classic fake, taken in 1934. Why the doctor would mention these fakes to her in such a fashion made her skin crawl, almost to build up to something else. That's when she heard that thud come from upstairs again. "Doctor, what is that noise coming from upstairs?" Evie's tone was nervous. The look on his face was like a man possessed with pure animosity. It didn't fit the tone of his voice at all. It was like one of those Italian horror films where the dubbing didn't quite match the facial expressions. "Old houses sometimes make noises. I can assure you, you are very much alone here, young lass. Now look at the next photo." Evie took another step back. The next photograph in this curious selection was not like the others. Not only was it in color, but it was also very clear. Appearing alongside a wooden deck chair of sorts on a stony beach by the water was a crystal clear shot of the monster. Only this one was different. A gigantic sloped head, resembling that of a large horse, complete with a brown mane, bearing sharp canine teeth, attached to a long, muscular neck. You could almost see the liquid glistening from its skin. The body was that of a walrus, blubbery, and with massive diamond-shaped flippers. It appeared to be facing right at the camera, its black eyes practically staring you down upon viewing it. Evie felt her entire being shiver, as if the thing was stood directly in front of her, looking down on her like some sort of plaything. This photograph is only on display here at the Society. You'll never see it in any express newspaper or hear about it on the radio. This photograph here is the only one in existence that shows the real creature. The doctor was deliberate in his words, and despite the whiskey he'd been so heartily pouring, he was stone cold sober in his tone. "And I think you already know that. Now, I want to see what made you drive all the way from London in the wee, ungodly hours of the morning. What do you have to show me? She was careful to take stock of the doctor while she picked up and unbuckled her satchel. Fragrant in its snug confines was the musty smell of something from the past. Her hands firmly rifled through, and the doctor's facial expression became one of mute officiousness. From the satchel to the oak table, Evie laid out a single VHS cassette tape in a tattered cardboard slipcover. What is on this videotape has been canvassed from the original negative, she said with a deep breath, watching the doctor pick it up from the table. Undoubtable proof of the creature. The doctor's eyes slowly locked onto Evie's after a brief analysis of the item. How old is this footage? He asked. Dr. McKendrick, this is the James Curry film. The old man was finally taken aback, almost spooked. In a reversal of moods, Evie noticed the reaction and felt her confidence grow in seconds, despite the fear she had harbored. The doctor's esoteric mannerisms were hard to predict. Evie was brought back to nightmares of her uncle when his dementia in later life caused violent outbursts. This, teamed with the noises she heard coming from upstairs, caused her to keep her hand firmly lodged next to her purse in defense. The James Curry film is a myth, the doctor stated. Doctor, you're heading an organization dedicated to a lake monster. I hope you realize the irony in that statement. The doctor seemed like a man used to having his own way for so long that he could barely see the rug pulled from underneath his feet. Well said, little miss, he said. It's just that Mr. James Curry was the byproduct of a local newspaper, desperate for a story. Evie smiled, assuredly. The doctor was surprised by her confidence until he looked down and saw the pistol, which held firmly pointed at him. Tell me the whole story. Enlighten me, she said, eyes wide. You've barely been able to contain your nerves all night. Who are you? When the cylinder ratchet clicked into place, it was as though the doctor finally took note of his own mortality. Okay, have it your way, he said with a huff. This is what we know here at the Society. The Aberdeen Evening Express published a story about a bank manager named Mr. Curry, supposedly having captured video footage of the creature in the 1930s. He said he had over 3 minutes of the most incredible proof, certifiable evidence of the creature's existence. He then locked away the footage in London in a bank vault, claiming he would not release it until, I quote, such matters were taken seriously. The problem we ran into with this whole tale was that there was no actual record of a James Curry ever existing. The article said he had been dead over 20 years, but there was no trace of a James Curry at any bank in London. The whole article was filled with irregularities. That's because his name wasn't really James Curry, Evie said solemnly, with a grown intensity in her movement. I got the original footage from a bank vault in Great Portland Street, London. The vault was my grandfather's, and his name was John Douglas. The doctor's mouth seemed to drop, along with his eyes, drawing recollection. Evie's expression had become one of deep-rooted anger. In about 10 minutes, the other members of the society will be here, he said firmly, and my staff upstairs will not be too happy getting awoken by gunshots. Evie stood her ground. Let's watch the tape, shall we, doctor? The video cassette slid comfortably into the mouth of the whirring tape player. The doctor's thick, shaking fingers struggled momentarily to find the channel. Evie's heart raced like a fluttering hawk moth. The glass screen on the hefty television loaded into play and bestowed a line of graininess to a suddenly clear and disturbing black and white silent first image. The doctor let out a sharp breath, while Evie ordered him not to take his eyes off of the screen. The image opened to display a beach at the edge of the loch. A bit of flare showed the bright and sunny silhouette and imposing face of Urquhart Castle visible in frame. It would have made a lovely postcard image if it wasn't for the movement on the rocks in front of the water. An unsettling contour of a bare-skinned woman laid down, bound and blindfolded, evidently screaming her lungs out. 3 minutes of evidence, doctor. With the screaming woman laid just before the lock, a large, disturbing appearance in the water, turning the liquid a rolling white color. Seconds after, an enormous horse-like head emerged from the lake and slowly moved towards the shoreline. The shallower the water, the more of the creature appeared on the screen, and before long, the frightening giant was fully revealed and realized in all its monstrous size. The monster appeared to analyze the woman for a moment under its rasping mouth, before ripping her away into the lake by her torso, her arms still attached to the ropes, nailed into the rocks. The creature's torrent in the water subsided slowly on screen, and 2 men could then be seen walking into frame. John Douglas and Dr. McKendrick. The tears that streamed her cheeks paled in comparison to the internal rage that festered. This dark country trip had changed from one of discovery to one of astute vengeance. "I have to say," she said, "you've aged incredibly well." Unnaturally so. The television screen buzzed to the view of tape static, and Dr. McKendrick turned to face Evie with his hands up where she could see them. "To get ahead in life, everybody has to make sacrifices," he said, "even if those sacrifices are of other people. You have been doing this for years, feeding people to that thing so you can carry on living? What kind of satanic magic is that?" That newspaper article was a warning to me, no doubt. John knew I would read it. He was probably trying to blackmail me with it to put a stop to it. Using the name Curry in the article was a nice chef's kiss. Curry was the name of my pet dog back in the day. John was not too happy when the creature ate it. He laughed. "You fed your dog to that creature?" "Well," he giggled. "Yes, as a matter of fact. That is disgusting. She was a beagle. She would have run away eventually. Besides, I learned from her that animal sacrifices offered no benefit in terms of a long life. To truly preserve the aging process, you must use people. The fresher, the better," he said. "Do you know how old I am, dear?" "You are 113 years old," Evie stated knowingly, causing the doctor's nerves to show once again. Her own research matching the firepower in her hand. "How do you know that?" "It was in my grandfather's diary." The doctor's face was awash with sweat, and he could feel the back of his shirt sticking to his shoulder blades irritatingly. His heart murmured as if his old age had somewhat agreed to catch up with him. Something he hadn't felt in years. He thought there was no way this could be happening, not naturally. It was all made clearer when Evie lowered her gun and eased off the trigger. "You told my grandfather that the monster was there to heal my grandmother. She had cancer. She believed the ritual was a healing one, just like the miracles your St. Columba performed. My grandfather drank himself to death in front of my family. He never got over that sacrifice you made. But he told me about the footage just before he died. The rest was in the diary." Evie heard a distinct whine that seemed to swell inside the doctor from his stomach region. Red-faced and keeled over, his voice wept in pain. "What is happening to me?" he cried. The doctor's vision swirled until a short spew of translucent bile erupted from the corners of his mouth onto the tartan rug underneath his knees. His complete loss of control caused him to drop and thud against the hardwood floor awkwardly, all 250 pounds worth of him. Evie breathed a sigh of relief and pocketed the gun in her purse. "I spiked your single malt a while back, doctor. I certainly timed it well. It was nice seeing you sweat like that." The air on the upstairs landing was different from the rest of the house downstairs. It was like every sap of coziness had decayed and left just a barren dark hallway with a sickly golden-colored carpet that looked stained from time. The wooden shelves on the walls were empty, save for the dust, and dead flies packed between the glass in each picture frame representing the deep lake. Every door down this hallway was shut, and Evie's sense of location couldn't pinpoint where those noises came from. She took out her gun and approached the first door on the left. The door brushed open slowly and scuffed across the heavy carpet. Within seconds, Evie's nostrils were assaulted with a wretched scent of something sour. She moved her free hand to cover the lower part of her face, but her stomach rolled uncomfortably. In the pitch black, she wrestled her arm against the wall to find the light switch. Once the large chandeliers on the ceiling filled the room with light, Evie could barely stand up. Every sense in her was paralyzed with shock. The smell. The malodorous air of fabric rinsed in ulcers and bodily evacuations. The spectacle of this grand-sized former dining room was replaced with a ward of sickening debilitation. 15 queen beds lined up, the women in them drugged into a semi-permanent state of sleep. Save for some occasional twitching, they were all heavily bloated, without a stitch of clothing, and riddled with bed sores. Evie could tell they probably hadn't moved in some time. If they did, it's not like they could go anywhere. Their legs were all amputated at the knees. Those people, those poor people, she thought. It took Evie another moment to regain her strength and sight from the tears in her eyes and sorrow she expressed. When it finally registered to her that each of these young women, these suffering women, were also heavily pregnant, the doctor's statement regarding the fresher, the better, dawned on her. This was not a ward. This was a farm. The doctor's bodily pain intensified when he started to wake. Icy cold and raw, scarred by the jagged teeth of the rocks against his bare skin. A storm of freezing rain showered down and frosted over his thick eyebrows. A thick sweater, hefty with absorbed water. He was able to move his head and neck enough to gauge being outside on the beach, and barely able to register a struggle to escape the tight lashes of dock line rope around his wrists. The storm was bountiful and loud, and his shock and awe grew with each clap of thunder. His soaking wet ears could barely hear the slumping on the rocks next to him. The slumping and slapping of something massive. It was a small distance away, but after arching his back sharply onto the stones to look back at the house, he could make out the silhouette of Evie, watching from the drawing room. Another crack of lightning, and the sky lightened up the entire area. The doctor felt his black heart sink to his stomach when he met the curious gaze of the creature's bulbous eyes that resembled large, swirling black marbles. "My word, you are magnificent. You are indeed the most beautiful thing I have ever laid my eyes on," he proclaimed. The sound of breaking bones, snapping like brush and sharp tears of flesh, became lost in the elements and the gargled screams. To Evie, it was as silent as the James Curry tape. Only this sequel had a more satisfying ending. She looked over at another frame on the wall, one which showed McKendrick's doctorate proudly displaying his credentials as an orthopedic surgeon. At that moment, she felt a wave of something come over her body, 10 times more powerful than any feeling of excitement she'd ever felt in her life. It was as though every stressor, every ounce of fear, every feeling of negativity had been flushed from her soul in a glow of euphoria. She took another peek outside the window to that wondrous storm and said to herself, "Thank you, doctor. I feel younger already." Year after year, we have a Christmas tradition of driving around neighborhoods and seeing all those lights, taking in the scenery, and how great is it when Christmas decor is synced to music? We love our lights around the holidays, but what about lights in the sky? And why is it that UFO sightings are so common all around the world, particularly during Christmas time? Now, full disclosure, UFO sightings are most popular during the summertime, but if we isolate the events to just being on a specific day, they are the most common around Christmas Day. Now, I've talked about UFOs on the podcast before, but I haven't really talked about what makes a UFO a UFO. Also known as a UAP nowadays. That's technically the more current term, but UFO is just ingrained in my lexicon. So UAP is unidentified aerial phenomena, and UFO, in case someone doesn't know, is unidentified flying object. But I, started to wonder what particularly makes a UFO a UFO. Like, what are the traits? What are the characteristics? And turns out there are what is known as the 5 observables. So I thought we would talk about those first before we get into the sightings. According to Luis Elizondo, a man who ran a small team for the U.S. Department of Defense, there are 5 common traits for UFOs when they're spotted. Luis has investigated military-based reports of UAPs, and he's basically compiled this report over the years from all of these sightings. So first is what Luis calls the anti-gravity lift. Unlike any known aircraft, these objects will defy the laws of physics on Earth with no visible means of propulsion. So it's moving, it's lifting, and you can't see like any turbines or an engine. They lack any wings, and they're often tubular or shaped like tic-tac mints. The second characteristic being sudden and instantaneous acceleration. So sudden increases in speed or changing direction so quickly, no human pilot could survive the G-force. The third characteristic of a UFO or UAP is hypersonic velocities without signatures. So at first when I read this, I was like, what does that mean? Don't worry, I've got you. This is when aircrafts travel faster than the speed of sound. They leave what is known as a signature, like vapor trails or sonic booms, but UFOs don't do this. They often don't have these signatures. They move super fast and they leave no trail and make no sound. So they're like silent but deadly, The fourth characteristic is low observability, also known as cloaking. Getting a clear or detailed view of these UAPs is often difficult, and witnesses often only will see a glow or a haze around the object. And last but certainly not least, the fifth characteristic is what is known as transmedium travel. UAPs have been seen moving easily in and between different environments like space, Earth's atmosphere, and even water. So they can bop around to all these different atmospheres, no problem. To recap, the 5 observables to keep in mind are anti-gravity lift, sudden acceleration, moving at hypersonic speed and leaving no signature, low observability, and transmedium travel. On Christmas Eve in 1971, 19-year-old Cheryl Costa, an airman first class assigned to the 1881st Communications Squadron at U.S. Air Force Base in Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam, was walking west at about 11:30 p.m. down a road that would take her to midnight mass. So she's headed to a late night church service, and at this time, the sky was crystal clear. But suddenly, Costa saw a bright, star-like object zoom from the north across the western sky. So at first, she thought this might be a meteor or a fighter jet. After all, she's at the Air Force Base. But then this bright light began to dance and dart around before heading south at a tremendous speed and then vanishing. Cheryl Costa was very perplexed by this, and she ended up becoming a reporter when she got older. And in 2013, she published an article on Syracuse New Times recalling the details of her UFO encounter, along with a lot of other people's encounters around Christmas. She included the details of 17 UFO sightings all on or around Christmas Day. And while New York has tons of UFO sightings year-round, the sightings seem to skyrocket around the holidays. One of the most noteworthy sightings, according to Costa, comes from Christmas Eve and Christmas Day in New York from 2011. So we'll start on Christmas Eve and kind of go through a timeline. On Christmas Eve at about 7:30 p.m., several people in the Brewerton area described a yellow-orange fireball object flying east to west, very low in the sky. The sky was again very clear that night, similar to Costa's experience, and the object appeared to have helicopters following it. Suddenly, this fiery object appeared to come to a full stop before shooting up to the sky at a great speed and then vanishing. Just 15 minutes later, at around 7:45 p.m., a Northport resident observed a bright red object moving silently and slowly across the sky. The object was reported to have occasionally stopped in its motion just before disappearing. A lot of starting and stopping, extreme speeds, and sudden changes of direction, shooting into different atmospheres, shooting into the sky, going really high. Classic descriptions of a UFO. Later, around 9:30 p.m., a Long Island resident witnessed a rapidly moving formation of 6 orange fireball objects ascending. Then each of the fireballs would wink out one by one. That's how it's described in this article. So it's like it would twinkle and vanish. Around this exact same time, several families in New York City were all standing outside looking at the sky because they were looking at 2 bright orange fireball objects flying above them. The objects would fly for a bit, then they would stop and hover, and then they would fly some more. Finally, the fireballs stopped, and then they would just kind of hover there before disappearing. Not much longer later, another orange fireball UFO showed up, put on another little show, and then again vanished. At about midnight Christmas Eve, a resident of Bleecker reported that a bright red object moved rapidly across the sky. It did some stop and hover maneuvers just like the other UFOs, then moved on and, just kept proceeding with its travel. The person who saw this said that there was local police responding to this and military presence shortly afterwards. So all of that happened on Christmas Eve throughout various parts of New York. And then Christmas Day, more stuff starts to happen. So Christmas Day at 7:30 p.m., 3 Holbrook residents were riding in a car on the Long Island Expressway when they saw 4 golden lights sitting in perfect alignment across the sky. They claimed that the lights were very bright, but when they pulled off at an exit, the objects were gone. Later that same day at about 11 p.m., a WANTAG, it's WANTAGH. Sorry if I am saying that wrong. Don't come for me. A Wantagh resident heard a visiting friend exclaim, "What the hell is that light?" They went outside to investigate and found 2 huge, bright orange vertical cylinders directly above them, traveling eastward. So they're similar color to some of the other sightings. They're tubular shaped, which is described in the 5 observables. And after a few minutes, the objects changed their orientation slightly before disappearing. These people reported their whole household felt really uneasy afterwards, which I feel like I would feel the same. It's always unsettling when you see something or hear something that you can't explain. At least it is to me. So to recap, 7 separate sightings, all within 2 days, in various parts of New York, and a lot of these sightings involved groups of people. It wasn't just individual people calling in. I feel like that makes it more credible. These guys definitely saw something. There were also several more sightings in New York in 2012, and some others Costa mentioned went all the way back to 1999. But I just thought I would focus on these 2011 sightings since most of those seem to be really credible. But feel free to check out those other sightings in the show notes if you want to learn more. So now we're going to go to Canada. Similarly, in Winnipeg, Canada, there is a ufologist named Chris Rutkowski, and he's been studying holiday sightings for over 3 decades. Rutkowski is the head of Winnipeg-based ufology research, and a lot of his studies have focused on the phenomena of the influx of UFO sightings that happen around Christmas. According to Rutkowski, 75 known sightings have occurred on Christmas Day in this area. There's a common theme in these sightings of seeing floating red lights followed by a string of white lights. Some people have theorized that this could be Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which I love. Rutkowski did note that there are still more cases in the summertime, but it's interesting that there's so many sightings, particularly on Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, and just after Christmas. Rutkowski told CBC, quote, "Most were simply lights in the sky. And yes, some were of a single red light flying overhead, followed by a string of others. But others did not seem to have a reindeer explanation," end quote. So one of the most famous sightings reported in Canada comes from 1996 in Yukon. This happened a few weeks before Christmas, though, on December 11th. But I thought it was relevant to mention because there is a Santa Claus element. So there's this man in Yukon that was watching TV when he noticed a long row of lights moving in the distance through the window. He thought it might be a 747 jet, but when he went outside, he realized that what he was looking at was making no noise. It was completely silent. He saw 4 big balls of light all in a row that were reddish yellow with a little bit of a blue hue to them. And on the outside of this row of lights were smaller lights that were orange and green. The man is like, "What the hell is this?" So he calls for his family, and his partner and his kids run outside. And they're, looking around, and their oldest kid, who was 6 years old, exclaimed that this must be Santa Claus and his reindeer. The lights continued to drift from left to right, and they were flying pretty low, just above the tree line. There also appeared to be white sparkles dropping away from the base of the larger lights, which sounds like fairy dust to me, or something enchanted. More than 35 other people reported this object as well. Later on, the Canadian Space Agency would claim a rocket booster was around the area, attributing these sightings to this. But I don't know. I like the Santa Claus and his reindeer story better. In Chilliwack, British Columbia, a UFO was seen Christmas night in 2008. Witnesses saw a star-like light, like a satellite, moving from south and traveling north. The object made loops and spins before going back south, and it was moving at this incredible speed because it was able to make these big loops from the northern part of the sky all the way to the southern part in just about 25 seconds. So I thought that one was cool because it's making like loop-de-loops. I haven't really heard that before. Again, in Canada, Christmas Eve 2010, there was a woman in Thompson, which is a city in north central Manitoba. And this woman claimed to have seen 3 unexplained reddish-orange lights forming a triangle in the sky. These lights stayed for about an hour before the middle light of the triangle fell and vanished, followed by the others. 2 years later, on Christmas Eve 2012, there was a couple driving near Canada, Ontario, and they saw a strange square-shaped object moving soundlessly in the distance. They pulled their truck over to watch it and see what was going on, and the object stayed there for several minutes. This object also had glowing, pulsating red lights. In 2017, on Christmas Day, around 1:30 in the morning, a resident in Quebec saw a bright light like a photo flash floating towards the car. The object then flew directly over their car. The object appeared to be triangular, and it had 3 turbines below it. The object got so close to this person's car that they could make out the turbine's spokes, which seemed to be made out of metal or steel. And when they tried to check out the object in the rearview mirror, it had vanished. One thing I do want to say about this one is that it has turbines, which would explain how it's propelling. This could have been something else, but still thought that was interesting, especially with like the photo flashing characteristic of it. In Canada, there's around 900 to 1,000 UFO reports every year, and many have simple explanations, but according to Rutkowski, there are some unusual cases that simply do not. One example comes from Resolute Bay, Nunavut, which is in Cornwallis Island, Canada. December 31st, 1997, there was this bright white light that was seen moving north, about 122 meters up, and moving between 645 to 800 kilometers per hour. According to the region's airport manager and witnesses, including meteorological technicians, nothing flew around there at that speed. and they all saw it too. This object was also flying at 3 a.m. They also explained they would be aware of anything flying in that area. So similar to New York and Canada, there have also been many sightings in New Zealand. In New Zealand, there's a pretty well-known sighting that has become known as the Kaikoura lights. That happened in 1978. The crew of a cargo aircraft saw a series of strange lights flying around their plane for several minutes just before disappearing, then reappearing. The lights varied significantly in size, with some being small and others being as big as a house. But all the lights were incredibly bright and were flashing. So then a week goes by, and there's this television crew that's from Australia, and they're flying to Christchurch when they see and they record what appears to be these same lights. One of the lights even followed the aircraft for such a long time, it followed it right up until it started to land. So the New Zealand Ministry of Defense gets involved because they're so concerned as to what these lights could be. They do this whole investigation, but the mystery of the Kaikoura lights remains unsolved. And there are many other stories that I could tell that have come from England, Germany, and more, including ones where people believe they saw Santa and his sleigh, but I think you get the idea. So let's get into some theories as to what could be causing all of these sightings. Similar to a lot of theories around UFO sightings, a lot of people think it could be military drones or planes, some type of government experiment. Other sightings have been attributed to rockets. There was that sighting in Canada where the Canadian Space Agency later claimed a rocket booster was around in the area, and they attributed the sightings to that. And there's definitely been other stories before of UFOs being attributed to government experiments, similar to all the things that we've talked about just briefly going on in Utah, like Skinwalker Ranch. There's also Area 51 there, and government experiments have gone on there before. They put things up in the sky all the time. So who knows? You know, the government keeps things from us all the time, and so does the military. They could be doing experiments with different technology that we don't know about. We always have to consider that possibility. But one of the main theories I wanted to talk about is that around Christmas time, there's also this theory that what we're seeing in the sky could be because of different light shows and Christmas lights that people are displaying. An example of this would be when a series of strange lights was seen over Wisconsin in December 2022. So this was very recent. And this sighting was later attributed to searchlights that were being used at the Holy Cross Church's Christmas display that year. The church's searchlights were right in the line of sight of these sightings. Witnesses who saw these UFOs or UAPs claimed that they saw bright orbs that seemed to glide through the clouds. Photos were even captured and posted on Twitter, so I'll put those on the Instagram post and in the YouTube video because I was able to find the photos and watch the video for myself. And according to investigator and columnist Mick West, the lights came from these searchlights at the church based on them being in the line of sight. West even included maps illustrating why he so strongly believed this. He also explained from a distance, all you see are the spots of lights moving in the clouds. The motion following music that was broadcasted on the radio and following long and complex sequences. However, there has been a lot of skepticism around this. Former FBI agent Ben Hansen explained his skepticism on Twitter, saying, quote, "This doesn't add up. The Flanders Christmas display is 12.5 miles from the witnesses. The family told us they used 380 DMX party lights. This video is the house recorded from 2 miles. Do we really need to go back 10 more miles? Not to mention, the pattern does not resemble what was captured on camera, nor are beams visible whatsoever in the witness videos. This demo was recorded under similar conditions at 10:50 p.m. You may feel this case is solved, but we still have work to do." End quote. And I agree. When I saw the video of these UAPs, I was like, there's no way this could be from spotlights. So what you see in the video at first, I'll go ahead and just describe it to you, is these 4 white lights, and 3 of them are like perfectly in a line with each other. And then there's like this slight gap, and there's a 4th light on the right-hand side of the frame. The 4 white lights look almost like falling stars, but they're heading horizontal in this perfectly straight line. They're fairly spaced out from each other. And then all of a sudden, this 5th light shoots out from the side where the 3 lights are, and it quickly speeds up and joins the other lights. And then the lights also start to kind of bob up and down across the sky, and they disappear quite quickly. So it doesn't seem like spotlights to me personally. But if you watch the video, let me know what you think. And finally, I wanted to end with this famous sighting out of Suffolk, England. This is one of the most famous UFO sightings in history, and it took place in December. So about 40 years ago, in a remote forest in Suffolk, England, a man named Vince Thurkettle was chopping wood early in the morning. It was late December 1980 when a car suddenly drove up. He wasn't expecting any company, and out stepped 2 men, aged about 30, both wearing suits. One man, in a well-spoken English accent, asked Thurkettle if it was all right if they asked him some questions. So Thurkettle said, yeah, that's fine. Just a few days prior, on December 26th and 28th, the United States Air Force security stationed at Rear RAF Woodbridge. I don't know if it's RAF or RAF, because it's just RAF in all caps. But the U.S. Air Force had reported in this area that they saw strange lights in the surrounding forest. So that's what these 2 men were inquiring to Thurkettle about, because he lived in this area, and there's not a lot of people that live around there. The men were polite, according to Thurkettle, but they were asking a lot of questions, and they also didn't identify themselves. They continued to ask Thurkettle if he had seen anything strange outside on the previous night, and he said he had not. Then the men explained that there had been a report of some red lights in the forest. After asking all their questions, they left, and Thurkettle was like, I wonder what that was all about. So he continued to check the paper every day, expecting to find some kind of explanation, but he never saw anything. That is until 3 years later, when the sighting wound up in the news of the world. And it was the front page story titled UFO Lands in Suffolk, and that's official. The story got their information from RAF or RAF Woodbridge Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt to the Ministry of Defense after the information was released by the U.S. government. So Lieutenant Halt described an encounter with an apparent UFO in the forest, and since then, the sighting has been both speculated and celebrated among UFO enthusiasts and skeptics. And today, the Rendlesham Forest, where this took place, even has a UFO trail that you can tour, complete with a life-size replica of a flying saucer. Gotta love capitalism. They make everything into a business. UK authorities claim they had no idea about the sighting in Rendlesham Forest until they saw the memo in the news all those years later. But the memo wasn't written until after Vince Thurkettle received a visit from these 2 strange men. So this would indicate someone must have told the men what was going on before. And only after the men visited Thurkettle were rumors spreading in the area about UFO sightings. Vince eventually figured out where the sighting took place, but being country born and bred, he claimed everything appeared normal. So he goes to this area and he's looking around, and this is how he would describe what he saw. Quote, "It was an absolutely normal glade in the forest with 3 rabbit scrapes, and they're all carefully marked. That happens to be roughly in a triangle. I mean, there was a ring of sticks around it, marking it. And I think fair dues to the Americans. If they'd been out at night and saw a light and came back in daytime looking for something, I could totally understand why they said this must be it. It was a completely natural glade. And they've said things like, there were broken branches. Well, the forest is full of broken branches. They saw burn marks on the trees. They said, obviously, there's heat radiating out from a spacecraft and it burned these trees.
But it wasn't. It was one of the rangers, Bill Briggs, with an axe, end quote. So Thurkettle's not buying this whole thing, and he theorized that it was a beam from a nearby lighthouse that people had seen that night. This sighting allegedly was in the only part of the forest where it's possible to see the Orfordness Lighthouse. And this lighthouse has since been torn down, so the lights in Rendlesham Forest remain a mystery. And the other mystery about this is, who were these two mysterious men? There have been people who believe that Vince was visited by none other than men in black. Journalist and academic Dr. David Clark believes it's most likely, though, Thurkettle's visitors were local newspaper reporters who had possibly learned of the incident from local police. You know, if it's a small town, people talk, people get curious. But they were both in nice suits. Maybe they wanted to appear official and then just get the gossip. Or maybe they were trying to keep something under wraps. However, the original sighting, which allegedly came from the United States Air Force security guards, has not been fully explained. One of the guards who claimed they saw this UFO that night was John Burroughs. He claims he first saw a beacon in the distance in the forest that had green, red, orange, and white lights. So him and his friends headed that way to investigate when they suddenly saw a white light silently explode, and then a red, oval, sun-like object appeared in the clearing. The object then lifted up through the trees and shot back towards the coast. John Burroughs recently published a new book, Weaponization of an Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, in which he outlines research that he says shows the incident was caused by experiments in harnessing energy fields in the forest. Burroughs claims that the lighthouse was emitting these electromagnetic frequencies towards Rendlesham Forest in order to study the energy field for different applications, including military use. Burroughs figured it was some sort of plasma that could be a form of intelligence. And when the memo of the sighting became public, none of the radar stations reported anything unusual on their logs over Christmas holiday. There was nothing seen on the radar of any kind. There are other people who believe the U.S. may have recovered a Russian satellite and that this sighting had something to do with Americans or the Russians or the Cold War. Others have pointed out how little information there is about this incident to the public eye. Perhaps there's some type of conspiracy or big cover-up going on. It seems not all of these sightings from around the globe can be so easily explained. It's also still unclear what's causing an uptick of sightings around the holidays. But whatever the case, these stories are certainly perplexing. And those are just some UFO sightings from around Christmas time. So what do you guys think about all these UFO sightings? Do you think that they have any credibility? Do you have any theories about why there are more UFO sightings around Christmas time? Have you ever seen a UFO or seen one on Christmas? Let me know. Krampus is a pretty well-known Yuletide Germanic demon, half goat, half man, cryptid situation. There's a lot going on. So we'll get into some legends and lore about Krampus, and even some alleged sightings. So Krampus is pretty well known. Some say he's one of the most well-known mythological creatures of all time. But I'll be honest, growing up in a pretty religious, conservative household, I never really had the opportunity to learn about Krampus. I don't think I had ever heard of him until recently, just being honest here. But I had a really fun and interesting time learning about him. Like many other legends, though, I do want to say here up front, there are a lot of different variations from region to region. Krampus has like slightly different names in different places. There's very similar legends all throughout Europe. So if you hear this legend and maybe you're familiar with a specific one, just keep in mind, it's not that I'm telling it wrong. It's that there's a lot of different versions here. So I'm going to try my best to give you guys an idea of who Krampus is and what the general consensus is about the legend. Think of it like the game of telephone. Like a lot of legends, there's going to be variations from place to place. So as I said before, Krampus comes from Germanic folklore, and like Americans have Santa Claus in their Christian winter celebrations, Germans have St. Nicholas, but in some of the legends, St. Nicholas has his evil henchman, Krampus. Krampus is like his assistant, if you will. If you think of like the angel and the devil on your shoulder, St. Nicholas is the angel or the good cop, and Krampus is the devil or the bad cop who punishes children. On December 5th, St. Nicholas is known to treat children in this area who behave, giving them gifts and treats like oranges, dried fruit, walnuts, and chocolate. But Krampus takes care of all those naughty children. But he doesn't just give them lumps of coal. He'll do you one better. So the origin of the name seems to either come from Bavarian culture with the word Krampen, meaning dead or rotten, or from the German word Krampen, meaning claw. Krampus is known to tower above children. He's really tall, like 7 feet, and he's covered with either brown or black matted fur. His legs bend backward like a goat, and he has one cloven hoof like a goat and one human foot like a man. His face would not be complete without his long and red pointed tongue, sharp fangs, grimaced expression, yellow eyes, and 2 long, curving, goat-like horns sitting atop his head. Pretty terrifying. It's like Mr. Tumnus, but like the Black Mirror Twilight Zone version. According to some, the original legend claims Krampus was one of the sons of Hel, the Norse god of the underworld, but this is a pretty controversial theory. A lot of people don't agree with that, but just something I heard from a couple of sources, so wanted to mention. The term Krampus also refers to an entire breed of demonic creatures that are sighted in wintertime in the Alps. It is said children who are haunted by Krampus will hear him before he arrives because he straps these big, large cowbells around his waist, and he'll have like other bells on his body as well. So instead of hearing like the cheerful sleigh bells of St. Nicholas, you'll hear these loud-ass cowbells, and you know that a giant goat man is going to come take you away. It's like bells from hell, basically. Krampus also carries around a switch or a rod with him made of birch, and he is known to beat children who disobey their parents, don't learn scripture well enough, etc. Yay. He also carries chains with him to bind any children that have strayed from a well-behaved path. The chains are also thought to symbolize the binding of the devil by the Christian church, and he is known to thrash these chains about, making a lot of noise, so he's kind of dramatic. In some legends, he drops nuts or berries for the children, but then he also beats the children if they take the treats from him. So he's very dramatic and hot and cold. Sounds like a Scorpio to me, which I can say because I am a Scorpio myself. As if all of that isn't terrifying enough, according to some legends, he also is said to carry a leather bucket or a woven basket on his back, and he uses this if a child's been really bad. He'll take the child, he'll kidnap them, and throw them into this bottomless sack, and he will carry them into the pits of hell, and sometimes he will even eat the children. Okay then. So this whole idea is obviously to scare children into not misbehaving. You know, we have all these cautionary tales that we tell kids, so this is no different, but this one's pretty intense, right? It's theorized that the legend of Krampus stems back to pre-Christian Alpine traditions before the Inquisition, and that it has pagan origins and celebrations date back to the 6th or 7th century AD. But written sources tell us that the legends are only at the end of the 16th century, So a lot of people think this goes back much further, but based on writings, we know that people at least started writing about Krampus at the end of the 16th century. So either way, it's a pretty old legend. And there is also Krampus Day, Krampus Night, or Krampus Nacht, and that's on December 5th, when Saint Nick and Krampus are said to visit children. They are known to visit homes and businesses as well on this day. So St. Nicholas, makes all of his rounds to the good children, and Krampus focuses on the bad ones. When St. Nicholas visits the children, he is known to carry a golden ceremonial staff, and he passes out the gifts and the treats, while Krampus hands out coal. And this is cool. I thought this sounded familiar. In Germany, some of the kids will put their shoes or their boots outside and hope that they're filled with sweets, nuts, and other goodies, like Christmas stockings. In most parts of Germany, though, St. Nick's counterpart is Knecht Ruprecht. There's also Belsnickel, who has many other names and is popular in folklore in southwestern Germany, who may have been based on Knecht Ruprecht. In many parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia, children are given a golden branch by St. Nicholas if they've been behaving. This represents their good deeds. But if the child has misbehaved, Krampus will give them a silver branch, and he takes all of their gifts away and keeps them for himself. Grinch-like behavior. So the legend of Krampus seems to have really been brought to life in Austria and Bavaria. And then it spread later to Germany when Germany was actually established as a country. Unlike Christian Christmas with angels, Jesus, and tidings of comfort and joy, early Austrian and Bavarian culture was not complete without ghouls and goblins. They love spookiness, including during December. So reminiscent of the boogeyman, it seems like Krampus is yet another cautionary tale for children to obey their parents, right? But Krampus tradition also established social order. In earliest times, this legend was told and carried out, and if adults were greedy, indecent, etc., it's said that they would be visited by Krampus. So this legend was not only used to control children, but also to scare and control society, at least for some time. The legend of Krampus really gained traction, as I said, in Austria and Bavaria. This was in the late 1800s, and a lot of this was thanks to these creepy, colorful greeting cards that started being distributed throughout the country. These were called either Krampuskarten or Krampuskarten, which included an artistic depiction of Krampus standing over children with his demonic grin and his switch in hand. Many of these cards are an early example in a long line of interpretations of the legend that still persist today. So some people basically say these Krampuskartens changed the legend a little bit. They made it a little bit more, I guess, dramatic or maybe like cartoon-like, kind of like how the media twists things and blows it up more. So some people say that these Krampuskartens twisted the legend and made it less accurate, but hard to say. In 1932, in Austria, the Krampus tradition was actually banned under the clerical fascist Fatherland Front and the Christian Social Party. Such buzzkillers. And 2 decades later, pamphlets were passed out to townspeople titled "Krampus is an Evil Man." The pamphlets strongly emphasized that they worried the Krampus legend would damage children's mental health, but for whatever reason, towards the end of the century, Krampus celebrations ramped back up again. So today, festivals in these areas are held annually, and they often include adults dressing up in Krampus attire. They carry around switches, and they wear these really creepy masks. By the Inquisition, dressing up as Krampus was banned by some civil authorities after the Catholic Church declared the celebration immoral, to the point that you could even be put to death if you were being perceived as a demonic figure. But the ban was really difficult to enforce because everyone was pretty spread out in this area, and a lot of people lived in these houses that were I guess, like high up or like in the thick of the woods, like hard to get to. So basically, it was really hard to enforce the ban, and the ban was useless. People were just going to do whatever they wanted. So like I said, these Krampus celebrations have made quite a comeback. They're known as Krampus runs, and you can see videos of these festivals in Austria with dozens of usually young men walking around with these scary masks, and they're trying to terrify the crowd with their antics. It's kind of like haunted house style, but it's in the streets of their town. There's even videos on TikTok of these men hitting people in the crowd with their switches. It's pretty wild. These festivals are common in Bavaria, in Tyrol regions of Austria. They're also popular in Germany, Austria, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Hungary, Northern Italy, France, Finland, and the Czech Republic. I think I named everyone. In Bavaria, there's the local artistic tradition of wearing hand-carved wooden masks, and this practice is known as Krampuslauf or Krampus Run. It's part of the ancient pagan ritual meant to disperse winter's ghosts. Similar to Samhain, which I know I said that wrong in my Halloween video. I called it Samhain. My bad to the 800 people who dragged me on the internet. But this has very similar traditions to Samhain, the festival in Ireland that happens around Halloween. And once a tradition to control society and keep children in line, today the Krampus tradition can offer escape for some people from societal norms and constraints. Kind of like Halloween, you can dress up and be a creepy little devil without consequence. It's customary to offer a Krampus some schnapps at the Krampus run, but as is to be expected, this has resulted in a lot of drunk Krampuses running throughout the streets and some disorderly conduct. So every year, like a lot of other things like this, there is always some controversy behind the celebration due to its origins, and also because, like a lot of celebrations, things can sometimes get out of hand. Occasionally, the spectators have been known to take revenge on the Krampuses for whipping them, and they'll attack them back. Which, if that's the ancient tradition, that's what they're gonna do. So it's kind of like showing up to a concert that is gonna have a mosh pit, and then throwing yourself in the mosh pit and getting mad if you get hit. What do you expect? In 2013, 8 people were injured in East Tyrol, or Tyrol, including with broken bones, when several Krampus runs went south. Krampus runs have become so popular, they've also made their way to several major cities in America, with some taking place annually in New York, LA, etc. But people in Austria and Bavaria have complained about this because now droves of Americans have started to come to their countries to see the authentic, original, traditional Krampus run. And this practice has been quite private and special to them for a long time. So understandably, they're not happy about this being spread to other countries. And the legend of Krampus has become so infamous that it's also made its way into American TV and films. In 2022, there was the horror film Krampus that was released in American theaters. And in this film, an American family had to battle Krampus in order to win back their Christmas spirit. According to Spotify podcast Mythology, quote, some modern warping of the Krampus myth is the same sort of pop culture facelift that turned the Catholic St. Nicholas into the non-denominational Santa Claus. It may make a number of traditionalists sad, but these changes are preferable to the myth of Krampus falling into obscurity, end quote. So before we wrap up today's episode, let's hear about an alleged Krampus sighting. This was written by Jay Riley. Jay says, my family has always had a weird fascination with the Krampus legend. Instead of offering me a reward for my good behavior, my parents reinforced me with, if you're bad, Krampus will get you. If you're bad, Krampus will beat you and give you coal. To be pretty honest with you, I always believed what they said for half my life. But I'm 23 now. I know better. Well, I thought I knew better. I moved away to the state of Washington with my aunt till I could afford my own place. This was after a very dramatic feud with my parents over some disagreements concerning my college major. Well, to heck with me for wanting to pursue my passions, I guess. Not the long, expensive career paths they wanted for me. I said some things I shouldn't have. It was back in 2010 when I was 16. Then, in 2016, just last year, they invited me back for Christmas, offering me apologies and a good time with no drama. I missed my family, but I was still angry at them. So I decided to fly back to Maine for Christmas weekend, but I was not going to apologize for anything that I had said. On December 23rd, I arrived. I gave my parents awkward hugs and expected the worst, but they were different. My parents didn't nag me or try to start drama. They actually cried when I showed up. They hugged me tighter than ever. It was nice, but it wasn't enough for me. I held onto that grudge like a lifeline. The next night, Christmas Eve night, arrived soon enough, and my parents and uncle and I were hanging out in the living room, sharing stories about everything I had missed while I was gone. And then, of course, came the talk of Krampus. I hope you've been good while you were away, my mom teased me. My father joined in with, I've noticed some tree branches missing around here lately. Probably just Krampus, preparing for quite a busy Christmas round here. My uncle laughed at this, but I rolled my eyes. It was pretty funny, but it was just their way of joking about the past. It helped me make everything more lighthearted, and I welcomed it. But that night I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. I felt guilty about my parents. Maybe back then when we argued, they just wanted a better future for me. That's why they were so upset with the future I had in mind for myself. It was around 1:30 in the morning. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I began to hear something from just outside my door. It was breathing. Heavy, raspy breathing. Like some sort of oddly tall and old hobo was standing outside my bedroom door, wondering if he should knock or just walk right inside. I got up, figuring my dad was playing a prank on me. I walked right over to the guest room door and swung it open. The hallway was empty, but I could still hear the breathing. Apparently, it hadn't just been coming from behind my door. The breathing was instead coming from the living room door. It was so loud that the breathing itself echoed through the hallway, and I suddenly felt insanely cold. That's when I figured someone had left the door wide open. Maybe the snowy wind was getting inside. Maybe that's what I was hearing. I walked down the hallway, which opened up towards the living room, and for the first time in a decade, I felt a little hesitant and creeped out. I couldn't figure out why. Surely no one had broken in, right? We didn't live very close to other people. When I reached the living room, I saw the door was actually still closed, locked up tight, but the breathing was definitely there, just outside the front door. Now, this is the creepiest part. There's a telephone pole with a light on it about 20 yards away from the front of the house overlooking the driveway. It often casts clear shadows of guests that walk up to the door. And on that dark and cold night, I could clearly see the shadows of thin legs being cast from underneath my door. It was then that I was certain someone was really outside. I swallowed hard, nearly choking on my own spit. I covered my mouth instinctively, afraid to let whoever was outside hear me. I should have told my parents then and there so that we could get some help, but my curiosity took over. And sure enough, I began walking toward the door to peek through the peephole. I closed my other eye and looked outside. I jumped back, nearly screaming, when I saw those teeth. Yellow, rotting, sharp teeth. And then they knocked. I was panicking then. I didn't know what to do. I'd never been in a situation like this before. Little did I know it was about to get much worse. Riley. Somehow they knew my name. Open the door and receive your punishment. I'll never forget that voice, not for as long as I live. By some unseen will, I quickly stood up, jumped over to the door, and unlocked it, throwing it open. The entire time, my mind was screaming, "What in the world am I doing?" The door was wide open now, and I could see everything. The light pole, the snow dropping lightly down in front of it, and an empty front porch. But there were footprints there. More like hoof prints, actually. I woke up my parents immediately, and I showed them the prints. But they began to laugh at me. "You can't be serious, Riley." My father put his hand on my shoulder. "You're too old to believe in Krampus." "Just looks like a goat or a deer, I would guess," my mom said as she leaned down to observe the odd tracks. "Yep, definitely a deer or goat with hooves twice the thickness of my own hand. Sounds about right, Mom." They went back to bed and told me to lock up the door, and I did as they told me, but I stayed in the living room trying to watch TV to take my mind off of things. Yet I kept glancing to the door, waiting to hear that breathing again. Yes, I apologized to my parents on Christmas morning, even if it was mostly due to my creepy experience. And I still went back to Washington after Christmas, back to a place I had never seen Krampus before. Let's just say I don't hold grudges any longer. And I don't answer the door at 1:30 in the morning to a heavily breathing stranger. So that story was written by someone named Jay Riley, and just to give them credit, I did find that on a YouTube channel called Darkness Prevails, which is a great channel. You can check it out, and you can hear more creepy Krampus sightings on their video. But that is the legend of Krampus. So this story begins really in late June 2017 in Toronto, Canada, but we will be going back much further as the story progresses. So at this time, Toronto had just finished celebrating their Pride weekend for LGBTQ, and they were just having a great time doing their parade. But the day after the celebration, a 49-year-old man named Andrew Kinsman had his friends and family very concerned because it had been several days since they had last heard from him or seen him. Kinsman was a gay man. He was an LGBT activist, and he was well established, a superintendent, and a long-term volunteer for the Toronto People with AIDS Foundation. Kinsman had many friends, and he was well-liked. He told his friend Robin that Monday that he was going to meet up with some friend for coffee, but he never returned. He was last seen at 71 Winchester Street, and by the time it was Wednesday, Robin knew for sure that something was wrong. So Robin reached out to another one of Andrew's friends, a man named Tom, and tells him what's going on. So, like good friends would do, Robin and Tom both decide that they're going to go to Andrew's apartment and see if they can figure out where he went. So I'm not sure how, but they do get inside Andrew's apartment. They're looking around, but everything seems pretty ordinary. Nothing was in disarray. There were no signs of a struggle or, any blood, nothing like that. But they do notice that Andrew's bag is missing. And Andrew carried this particular bag with him everywhere. So they think he must have gone somewhere, but to where, they have no idea. And this is when things get really troublesome. Then they find Andrew's 17-year-old cat. And his cat was left without food or water. And Andrew loved this cat greatly, and then also it's an elderly animal. He needs a lot of care. So they know that Andrew wouldn't just leave without making sure his cat was taken care of. So this is when Robin and Tom report Andrew missing to Toronto police. Andrew had a lot of friends in the church and Wellesley area of Toronto, also known as the Gay Village. He was a regular at the businesses there, and he had a lot of friends around. His friends quickly put their own search team together, and they're looking everywhere for him because at this point, the police are not involved in the search, so someone has to look. They're calling local media stations, they're hanging up posters everywhere, and because Andrew had this really strong support system, pressure starts getting put on the police department, as it should be. So they're calling the police station all the time, and eventually police do get involved in the search and they start investigating. They're calling people who knew Andrew, they're interviewing them, asking them questions, and then they're also looking into Andrew's personal records, finances, bank statements, call logs. They're even checking local shelters and hospitals. But despite them combing through Andrew Kinsman's life, they're not finding any red flags. There's no reason for him to just disappear on his own volition. And Andrew also hadn't accessed his phone since the day that he was last seen, Monday. He hadn't used his credit cards either, and he hadn't withdrawn any money from his bank account. What was also very concerning to Andrew's chosen family is that he was not the first gay man from the Gay Village to recently disappear. Just a few months prior, 44-year-old Salim Essen had disappeared in mid-April. He was last seen in the Yong and Bloor area. A Turkish native, Salim was unemployed and he was a known drug user. He frequented the Gay Village area, and Essen had just gotten a place of his own, and his friends would later say he was working towards recovery at the time of his disappearance. Which is so tragic because it's like he was finally starting to get his life together. He did have more of a transient lifestyle still at the time. He had just gotten this place, but it sounds like he often couch surfed, and he was known to take very few belongings with him everywhere, and he would keep them all in this silver plastic suitcase with wheels. So when Salim never returned, his suitcase was also nowhere to be found, so a lot of people just assumed that he went to another town to hang out at, and it would be several weeks before he would ever be reported missing. And police had not yet connected the disappearances of Andrew and Salim, but people in the area had. They knew that this area was vulnerable to hate crimes and attacks. They also felt these cases were connected because going all the way back to 2010, there had been 6 other gay men who had disappeared from the area without a trace. September 16th, 2010 seems to be when the first disappearance took place. Another man who frequented this area was a 43-year-old Sri Lankan refugee named Skanda Navaratnam. He was last seen leaving a gay bar called Zippers, and just 3 months later, another man would disappear. 44-year-old Abdul Basir Faizi, who went by Basir, would later disappear at the end of December. Faizi was an immigrant from Afghanistan, and he was married with children, but he was leading this double life, frequenting the Gay Village. He was last seen leaving work at about 7 p.m., December 28th, 2010, near the area of Church and Wellesley Streets. 2 years later, in October 2012, another disappearance would occur. And this would be 58-year-old Majid Kaihan, who went by Hamed. Similarly, Kaihan was married. He was an Afghan man leading this double life, frequenting the Gay Village. In case you haven't noticed, there are a lot of similarities here. All of these men were Middle Eastern or South Asian. They had very similar likeness too. Like if you look at pictures of them, even like the facial hair is similar. They're around the same age. And these cases had all been investigated by Toronto police, but they were worked individually. Now, to be fair, there were no bodies, no witnesses, and no signs of these men being harmed in any way. But one of the female detectives working these men's disappearances at the time claims she believed these cases could be connected and that there could be a serial killer in Toronto. But her suggestions allegedly were dismissed by Toronto police. It seems that after Kaihan went missing, since he was the third person, police finally started to realize this may not just be coincidence. So a few weeks after Kaihan's disappearance, police put together a task force in November 2012, and they called it Project Houston. They named the project Project Houston after the infamous phrase, "Houston, we have a problem." And we'll talk more specifically about why they called it that in a second. Detective Harris gets a tip in regards to Navaratnam's disappearance. The tip came from a detective from Bern, Switzerland. And the tip was that Skanda Navaratnam had been kidnapped, murdered, and eaten by a cannibal in Toronto. The detective had come across a website, and I'm not going to say the name of this website, but it was about cannibalism. And he started to speak with someone who was active on this website with the username Chefmate50. This user would claim to the detective that he had kidnapped, murdered, and cannibalized a brown-skinned man from the gay village in Toronto between 2009 and 2011. And Navaratnam disappeared in 2010. The detective believed this victim could be Skanda, so he calls this detective to tell her about his concerns. So they quickly link this username, Chefmate50, to an email address, and they would eventually be able to trace this email back to a man named James Brunton. Brunton had been emailing people all over the world about his fantasies to torture them, kill them, and eat them. And a lot of these stories, you find that these men, these monsters, lead incredibly normal lives. And Brunton is no different. Brunton was a minor hockey coach, coaching children in his mid-60s, and he was married to a woman. He had a daughter, and he had absolutely no criminal record of any kind. He also lived near Toronto, and he volunteered with a suicidal hotline. So just this complete double life, so scary. People who were close to him knew that he frequented the gay village, and police basically saw Brunton as a suspect at this point. Meanwhile, they're looking more and more into other missing person cases in this area, and they start to see this potential link between Navaratnam, Faizi, and Kaihan. People in the village were relieved that police were finally looking into these concerns. Police worked with an IT expert who was able to create a profile and contact Chefmate50. So Chefmate50 went into unspeakable detail on his experience with cannibalism and how he had murdered multiple people at a cabin in Toronto. But police still could not find anything tangible to connect Brunton to these crimes. Now, police did eventually infiltrate Brunton's home, and they did this while he and his wife were not home, and they did clone Brunton's computer. This was on Christmas Day, so Brunton and his wife were out of town visiting family, and they find more disturbing chats and emails, and they start to think more and more about this cabin that Brunton had described online. They're looking at maps, they have drones, and they're searching for cabins. But the trees in this area were so thick and dense that they knew that they needed to get boots on the ground to find this cabin. Police eventually find a cabin, and they have all these trees surrounding the cabin, and a lot of the tree trunks had purple ribbon tied around them. So it was like these purple ribbons were like a path to the cabin. They also find a long beam near the cabin, about 15 to 20 feet tall, and it had this pulley system, ropes, and hooks, so you could suspend whatever you wanted on it. And in the chat with Chefmate50, Brunton had described these fantasies and how he had allegedly killed and cannibalized people, and he had hung their bodies on this hook pulley system. So they're like, oh my God, we just found where he's, putting these bodies. The pulley system was located in front of the cabin, and they start looking inside the cabin, and they see that Brunton had described the cabin very similarly. It looks the same inside. And then they also see this big fire pit. And near the fire pit, they find a number of male boots and shoes nailed to a tree with burn marks all over them. The shoes were taken to forensics to see if they could get any DNA, but the DNA was negative for any of the missing men that they were looking for in Toronto, and the DNA also did not match anyone in the National Databank. But I'm still wondering at this point, okay, then what DNA did you find? Was it his DNA? It's very concerning, obviously. And police did continue to search through Brunton's computer. This IT expert was working on it, combing through all the files, and he would describe the files as being the most disturbing content you could ever see. Just unimaginable. Eventually, police do find an email between Brunton posing as Chefmate 50, and he's typed out this written agreement between him and a 15-year-old boy. And the agreement was that when this boy turned 18, Chefmate could do whatever he wanted to him and basically have control over his body. He could kill him, he could do whatever. The teenager was found in Colorado with help from the sexual exploitation unit, and thank God the boy was alive, unharmed. And he said that Brunton had greatly pressured him to agree to this contract, but he had refused. He also said that Brunton had asked the boy to send him naked pictures. And at this point, police are still digging through Brunton's computer. There's tons and tons of data on it. And eventually they come across a video from 2003. If you remember, Brunton is a minor league hockey coach for children, okay? So they find this video, and it is a hidden camera, wouldn't you know, in the boys' locker room. So he had been filming these boys without them knowing as they undressed. Just disgusting. The one silver lining in this, though, is that this now gave police enough to arrest Brunton, and they took it one step further to have a cop pose on this website. So there's this terminology they use on the website, and it's so disturbing. So if you are a long pig, you are someone who is willing to give yourself up to be cannibalized. And the person killing is known as a master chef. So the undercover officer poses as a long pig and creates this profile. And pretty much immediately, they get an email from Chefmate 50. So Chefmate 50, also known as Brunton, claims he can fulfill his request to be cannibalized, and he asks this person to meet Brunton at his cabin. So a full team goes to this cabin in the woods in Toronto. They're ready to go. They've got a SWAT team, and they have people very closely surveilling Brunton so they know when he's headed to the cabin. He does leave his house, and he drives around. But he drives to a mall and then he turns around and drives back home. So it's not clear if he got cold feet or if he's just making all of this up. It's just fantasy. But eventually police can't sit on this anymore. I guess they were hoping to also get an arrest for attempted murder or something. But they still have enough to arrest him because of the child pornography. So they arrest him in his home, and he gets brought to the station for further questioning. So the whole time that he's being questioned, he has his head down, he's not talking, he's not making eye contact, and he has absolutely no reaction as the charges are being read to him. But as soon as they start talking about what he said online, about killing people, eating people, it's like his whole demeanor changes. He lights up and sits up and he's all open, and he fully admits to saying everything that he said online, like he's proud of it. But Brunton would claim that this was all fantasy based and none of it was actually true. He was later found guilty of creating, possessing, and distributing child sex abuse material. and they couldn't find anything else to link Brunton to the disappearances of the men in the gay village. So Brunton was ruled out as a suspect. But I still am like, okay, what the hell were all those burned shoes? Like, just huge question marks there. But we don't know. Very upsetting. But obviously, we still need to figure out who's responsible for all these men's disappearances in Toronto. So police are looking back at all of this, and they're, trying to piece together what could have happened to these men. Also, I forgot to mention, I said I was going to talk more about the name Project Houston. They specifically came up with that name when they were worried that there was a cannibal in Toronto. So it was like, Houston, we have a problem. There could be a cannibal here. Anyway, Project Houston continues their investigation into other suspects. They're looking into any possible leads. And this investigation continued until April 2014. So after about a year and a half of investigating the disappearances of these 3 men, they had nothing but dead ends, and not to mention no other men had disappeared from the area. So things go silent for about 3 years, until the summer of 2017, when the 2 men that I told you about at the beginning would disappear, Andrew Kinsman and Salim Essen. So the community is rocked once again when Kinsman and Essen disappear. While Andrew did not fit the physical profile of the other 4 men that had gone missing, as he was a white man, he was a gay man, and he had mysteriously vanished from the same area. And this was a pretty small, tight-knit community. So a lot of people thought this could still be connected to all the other men's disappearances. So in 2017, another task force is created, known as Project Prism. But this project specifically focused on the disappearances of Kinsman and Essen. They're not really looking further at the other men at this point. And a lot of people think that police still hadn't connected all of these disappearances together. They were still working them separate. Detective David Dickinson, who had been working in homicide for 5 years, was asked to oversee this investigation. But by the way, this was the first time he had ever overseen a missing persons case. So he's worked in homicide, but he's inexperienced with working missing persons cases. Because Kinsman was last seen at his residence, police start their investigation there. So they're looking around, and they see that Andrew kept a paper calendar in his apartment. And police find there are 2 written reminders for the day of June 26th, 2017, the day he disappeared. The first reminder was to pay his phone bill, but the second one said, 3 p.m., Bruce. And it is believed that this was around the time that Andrew Kinsman vanished. So now they have a name, but that's all they have, a first name, Bruce. But it's a lead. So they're wondering if perhaps this Bruce is the man that he was going to meet for coffee, the one that he had told Robin about. Police then began to look at the street cameras surrounding Kinsman's apartment complex to see if they can see who this person was, or if they can see Kinsman leaving the apartment at all. And eventually they find some interesting footage on one of the cameras that's aimed at a street corner outside the building. At 3 p.m., a red van can be seen pulling up to the street corner for just a few seconds and then quickly pulling away. Later, though, they find a second security camera with a better angle of this red van. And in this angle, you can see a man getting into the passenger seat. And these 2 clips are on CBC's website, so I'll include the link in the show notes if you want to watch the video. The camera quality is not the best. It's far away, so you can't make out the license plate. You can't see anything about the driver, and you also really can't tell much about the passenger, other than they appear to be male, and whoever this passenger was, they're very tall because they're towering over the vehicle. And Kinsman was about 6'4". Police figure out eventually that this red van is a Dodge Caravan 2004 25th anniversary edition. So then they get a list of all these vehicles registered to Ontario that, match this description, but it has more than 6,100 names on it. But when they start looking at the names of the owners, looking for Bruce's, then there's only about 5 names. And only one drove the 25th anniversary edition. And this was a man named Bruce McArthur. Thomas Donald Bruce McArthur, who went by Bruce, was a 66-year-old man born in 1951 in Ontario. He was raised on a farm, and his parents fostered troubled children from Toronto. So many children were in and out of his home at any given time. His family had built a good reputation in the area, and growing up, Bruce was known to be a teacher's pet and very well behaved. He was also well liked in the area in his adult life, and he even owned his own landscaping business. He had a lot of clientele in Toronto, and he was married to a woman named Janice Campbell. They were married for a long time, but in the 90s, he began to have secret sexual affairs with men. He eventually came out to his wife, and they continued to live together for financial reasons. Bruce had suspected he was gay from a young age, but he lived in a very religious household, so he had to suppress his sexuality. He remained closeted for decades and continued to be very active in the church until the 90s. Bruce McArthur had 5 children, and he was also a grandfather. In 1997, Bruce and Janice did finally separate, and they were also going through a lot of financial problems. Remember, they stayed together for financial reasons, but they did eventually separate, and when they did this, they declared bankruptcy in 1999. So he was clearly going through a lot of stress, and after his divorce, McArthur would move into a small apartment in Toronto. Bruce was a big, burly man with round features and a friendly appearance. He had snow white hair, and in his free time, he dressed up as a mall Santa Claus. He worked at the mall as a Santa, and children would sit in his lap every year and tell him what they wanted for Christmas. So he's this friendly, jolly-looking man, but when police start looking into McArthur, they quickly find big red flags. 1 year before Kinsman and Essen disappeared, in 2016, McArthur had actually been arrested for a brutal assault on a man in the back of his red van. He had choked and nearly killed this man, but the man luckily survived. After committing the assault, McArthur walked himself into the Toronto police station, claiming he needed to put a statement on record about an incident that occurred between him and his partner. He claimed that while he and his partner were being intimate, he choked him. So he did admit to choking this man, but he claimed that he choked his partner because he asked him to, that it was consensual. And this was just one big misunderstanding. The identity of this victim was never released to the public, but we do know that this man was married and his wife was not aware of this affair. It's likely the man never pressed charges due to fear of outing himself. And because charges were never pressed, nothing further happened with McArthur at this time. And him getting in front of the investigation, walking in and pretty much, confessing and trying to paint this as this consensual affair, this is a pattern with Bruce McArthur. Police soon discover this is not the only documentation that they have on McArthur. In 2001, so going way back and just a few years after he was divorced, McArthur had pled guilty and was convicted of assault after beating a man with a metal pipe in his home on October 31st. Now, at first, when I started looking at this, I was pretty confused about who this man was because a lot of the sources called him a sex worker and that he and McArthur had met in an online chat room, that they were meeting up for sex, blah, blah, blah. But then I started looking more and more, and several other sources paint a much different and I think much more accurate picture of what actually happened. So this victim was a man named Mark Henderson, and Henderson was a familiar face in the Toronto gay village. He was well-liked. On Halloween, Henderson locked up his bicycle and saw McArthur paying for street parking. Henderson and McArthur knew each other, but In some interviews, Henderson says that he didn't really like MacArthur. He wasn't fond of him. MacArthur jogged to catch up with Henderson, though. And he just thought that maybe he was trying to catch the door and go in the building. So Henderson lets him in through the apartment building's security door. And they start striking up this conversation about their plans for Halloween, because it's Halloween day. And they're talking about the costume Henderson's going to wear, blah, blah, blah. And then before Henderson knows, when he's outside of his apartment door, and this is in broad daylight, he feels something strike him with great force in the back of his head, bringing Henderson to his knees. So he's rattled. He turns around and he sees Bruce MacArthur with a huge metal pipe. And he strikes down on Henderson again. And so Henderson is dazed, confused. He's terrified. And he would later say in interviews that cerebrospinal fluid and blood was pouring down from his head. So he's scrambling to get in his apartment. He's trying to call 911. And luckily, Henderson is able to get to a phone. He's calling 911 as Bruce MacArthur is standing there. And Bruce is begging him, like, don't turn me in, don't turn me in. And the police dispatch is like, can you describe the man? What does he look like? And he is telling dispatch what this man is wearing as he's staring at Bruce. And so they're like literally face to face. This man has just tried to kill him. And he's like, yeah, he's wearing this, blah, blah, blah. Like, just terrifying and insane. This entire attack took less than 5 minutes. And MacArthur was left with a skull fracture and broken fingers. That's how hard he hit him. He fractured his skull. And the reason that his fingers were broken is because he lifted his hand trying to defend himself, and it broke several of his fingers. So the next thing that this victim, Mark Henderson, remembers is the EMTs cracking jokes, laying over him. So this man has just had his skull fractured, and the people that are supposed to be helping him and giving him medical attention are cracking jokes. And police asked him repeatedly if he was having sex with MacArthur. Not, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Not, can you describe this man? Just immediately victim blaming. This is 2001. It's just horrific. I cannot imagine what this man went through. By the way, Mark Henderson was studying to become a nurse. He was a sex worker in the past, with a drug addiction in the past. And then he went through rehab and he was studying to become a healthcare worker when this happened to him. But the media painted him as a sex worker who was having sex with a gay man and, basically blaming him. So it's, just another one of those disgusting, horrific stories of victim blaming. And you see this with how police worked this case too, because they did not even bother to take a statement from Henderson. So when you look at this, there's no record of his statement whatsoever. Henderson would later learn that MacArthur also quickly turned himself in after that, claiming that they had been having sex, and he's trying to build this narrative and get ahead of things, just like he would do with this other assault years later. In Netflix's series Catching Killers, Henderson's story is also conveniently not featured. Instead, he says that he was carved out of this narrative because Toronto's cops had a chance to catch MacArthur much sooner. This was in 2001. He gave this man a skull fracture, and they didn't even get a statement, nothing. So, MacArthur gets in front of this. He does confess, but you'll see, it's very cunning the way that Bruce MacArthur did all of this. So Mark Henderson would later say in an interview, quote, "I would defend the police if they did get it right, but they just kept doing everything wrong. And the fact that they're even ignoring me now drives me up the wall," end quote. So at the time of his attack, like I said, Henderson was studying to become a nurse. He was modeling in bars and clubs to make ends meet, and he was full of energy, confident. He was happy to jump on a stage. He would dance and do comedy. So he would entertain people, make them laugh. He also championed a safe sex message in the community and contributed often towards establishing the Casey House, which was Canada's first hospital specializing in the treatment of HIV. But after his attack, Henderson became afraid of the dark. He began to avoid people, and he was dealing with PTSD, trauma, extreme seasons of anger. And he even had panic attacks on the street, swearing that he would see McArthur, even though he knew this was impossible. So, like I said, Bruce McArthur confesses, he gets in front of this and he tries to paint this whole picture of this being just this consensual thing gone wrong, whatever. And he is charged with assault, but Bruce McArthur underwent a psychological assessment, and he was determined to be a low risk for being a repeat offender. He was given a conditional sentence of about 2 years, which included being banned from the gay village. And he had house arrest for a year, he had probation, but he served no jail time for attempted murder. So I do think, like Henderson said, it's pretty convenient that Henderson's story was not mentioned in the Catching Killers documentary, where they interview police. And it's a very police-centered show. Just my opinion. In 2003, Bruce McArthur was given a full pardon, and Henderson says he returned to the police many times, saying he wanted to make an official statement. But police dismissed Henderson time after time. It would also later be discovered that Bruce was having hookups with sex workers, and we know that he was highly aggressive with at least one man in 2012 who left Toronto shortly after this incident and dealt with trauma and fear for his life. McArthur also became enraged when this man mentioned that he and his boyfriend tracked each other's locations. So this man believes that looking back, McArthur likely planned to murder him. And then he decided against this with fear of getting caught. So now going back to the Project Houston investigation, eventually the lead officer over the project would get word that Bruce McArthur was a suspect. And turns out they had questioned Bruce McArthur in 2013 as well about this specific group of missing men, because he had known connections to the missing men. When looking through Scanda's computer, police found emails from a Hotmail account, silverfox51@hotmail.com. Scanda had also written this email address down on a piece of paper that police would find, and when they searched the IP address, it's connected to Bruce McArthur. November 11th, 2013, McArthur was asked to come speak with police as a witness. He admitted to knowing Scanda, saying that they used to hang out together at a bar in the gay village called the Black Eagle, but he denied having any kind of sexual relationship with him. This was later determined to be a lie, because McArthur had been dating Scanda on and off for the last decade. When police asked why his email address would be written down in Scanda's apartment, McArthur offered no explanation. And at that point, police are thinking Scanda may have written down McArthur's email address after finding it on a dating site that they were both on. The other connection was with Basir. Basir was on the same dating website. And McArthur also admitted in this interview to personally knowing Kaihan, the man who went by Hamed and went missing in 2012. He even admitted to having a sexual relationship with Hamed, and Hamed was also a former employee of Bruce at his landscaping company. Come on. At the time, police found Bruce to be affable, credible, and very believable. He was also very cooperative and helpful with the investigation, and he wasn't considered a suspect. So, flashing forward to 2017, when these next two men disappear. This has been going on for at least 17 years at this point. So they're doing Project Prism in 2017, and now, fucking finally, all of the signs are pointing to Bruce McArthur in the eyes of the police. even though the signs, in my opinion, were clearly pointing to him decades before this. Police quickly find out MacArthur has also now conveniently sold his red van, and police start calling auto body shops thinking he may have sold it for parts. And after weeks, they do find an auto parts shop about an hour away that bought a red Dodge Caravan just after the murders. The owner of the auto parts also still had the van there. And other than the license plate and the tires being gone, the van inside and the whole body outside is intact. So they're like, great, we can start, looking inside. So they look inside this vehicle. It's pretty messy. It's like dirty. There's coffee cups everywhere. And there is this dried liquid that they say was covering the tailgate. And whatever this liquid was, it was attracting a lot of small flies. Police then took the van to forensics for processing, and a very small amount, like the size of a pinky nail, of Andrew Kinsman's blood was found inside. But this blood was not enough to press charges. It's such a minuscule amount. So at this point, MacArthur is definitely a suspect. He's being heavily surveilled, but they don't have enough to arrest him for murder. One source I read also said that they found DNA evidence of Salim Essen as well inside of the van, but I only found it from one source, and a lot of the other sources that I watched and read did not mention this, so take of that what you will. MacArthur also, and this is a huge question mark for me that we're going to talk about more, but MacArthur lived with a roommate, and they wanted to search the apartment, but they don't want the roommate or MacArthur to know. So they plan to search the apartment while they're both not home. They get a warrant, and they're planning to clone MacArthur's computer and hard drive. So they search for any physical evidence that they can link to Andrew Kinsman. And eventually they do find a time where MacArthur and his roommate are not home. Police enter the apartment, and at this point, they've been surveilling Bruce heavily. They know his routine, and they know that they're going to have plenty of time to get everything that they need. They've also put a GPS tracking device on MacArthur's vehicle so that they'll know if he's coming back. So they'll know when they need to leave. Police get to work, and they do find some clues. Basically a murder kit. There's rope, gloves, tape, a 9-inch metal bar covered in tape, a bunch of Post-it notes with various usernames and passwords to websites, and there's this orange stain on Bruce's pillow that they swabbed for DNA. Police are also cloning his computer, but it's going to take a couple hours to fully get everything off of it. So despite having memorized Bruce MacArthur's patterns, routines, for whatever reason on this particular day, MacArthur decided to turn around and go back home after being gone for just about an hour and a half. So the surveillance team sees this. They quickly contact the police inside, warning them Bruce is on his way back, and he'll be back in just 10 minutes. So basically they have to hustle and get as much done as they possibly can before Bruce gets back. They don't want to leave any trace of them having been there, but they really need what's on that computer, and it's taking forever to clone it. When police first entered the apartment, they also took pictures of how everything looked so that they could put it all back the way that it was, because they don't want Bruce to have any inclination they were there. So they're putting everything back while they're cloning this computer, and they get about 50% of the data off of the computer just before Bruce gets back. So they're able to sneak out just a few minutes before Bruce gets home. And then it's time to start, looking through this 50% of data. So police are taking everything they can, they're looking at it, and they find web history, chats, emails, pictures, metadata that included a vast amount of photos that had been deleted. Police are searching this computer for weeks. They're not finding anything, but eventually they find a lot of pictures of men, including pictures of Andrew Kinsman, Skanda Navaratnam, Basir Faizi, and Hamed Kaihan. The very next day was Toronto's police annual press conference, and turns out they had a lot to answer for. Like, obviously all of these men's disappearances too, but that's not all. There are also recent disappearances of Alora Wells, a 27-year-old transgendered mixed race woman who had gone missing in June of 2017, but was not identified until late November 2017. Alora frequented Gay Village, and there was also Tess Ritchie, who had gone missing for 4 days and was later found dead by her own mother at the bottom of a stairwell in Gay Village, just 2 doors down from where she had first disappeared. Police are also discussing Project Prism, but they're still not disclosing that there is a serial killer in this area, even though they know this at this point. So, statistically, I personally think this is pretty alarming that they've had this many people go missing in this one tight-knit area, so close together. That's 4 people who have gone missing from this area in 2017, if you are talking too about Alora and Tess. So, in my opinion, there were a lot of question marks in how police were handling missing persons in this area, especially people in the Gay Village. Meanwhile, police continue to look further and further into Bruce McArthur. January of 2018, police find more pictures on Bruce's computer. And this time, the photos are of Salim Essen, the other man who had gone missing in 2017, a few months before Andrew Kinsman. So at this point, police have now found photos of known missing persons on Bruce's computer, 5 of these missing men. And this time, when they find the photos of Salim Essen, it's not just like profile pictures of him. These photos were of Salim Essen lying dead on Bruce's bed. It appeared that Bruce had used a metal pipe to tighten a ligature around Salim's neck, cutting off his oxygen and suffocating him. They then find a photo of Andrew Kinsman dead in the back of Bruce's van. And there were other pictures of men in these files, clearly dead, that police didn't even recognize. Many of the men were also posed wearing a fur coat, sometimes wearing a hat with cigars in their mouth, and some had a ligature around their neck. One victim had even been decapitated. Police then get a call January 18th from the surveillance team because they're still watching Bruce very closely 24 hours a day. And Bruce has now brought another man to his apartment. So they know that they need to act quickly. The team of officers rush to Bruce McArthur's apartment building, and Bruce lives on the 19th floor. So it's just after 10 a.m., again, like broad daylight. This man is just so confident, it fucking disgusts me. And the police rush in, but only one of the elevators to this apartment is working. So they're mashing this button. It's taking forever for the elevators to come. And finally, they get in the elevator. It's packed. And of course, the elevator is stopping on every floor. They finally get up there, but instead of busting in, classic Canadian behavior, they knock on the door. Bruce McArthur opens the door, and police force their way inside, handcuffing McArthur. They find McArthur's soon-to-be next victim restrained to the bed, still alive, blindfolded with a bag over his face, saving him just in time. McArthur has now finally been arrested for the murders of Andrew Kinsman and Salim Essen. Police find a murder kit inside the apartment, complete with zip ties, syringes, surgical gloves, rope, a bungee cord, and duct tape. Police also find trophies from prior victims, including Scanda's jewelry and Salim's notebook. They also find the fur coat that many of the deceased men were wearing in the photos in the back of McArthur's van, along with the metal pipe, which they found underneath the driver's seat of the vehicle. Police interrogated McArthur for 10 hours, and the entire time he is, again, incredibly polite, but he has no answers for police. He's just denying everything. He's not giving them any information. And remember, at this point, they still do not have a single body. They don't have any human remains. They're having a hard time getting everything that they need and getting closure for everybody. They don't know where MacArthur is putting any of these victims. They don't find anything like that in the apartment. So they're looking more and more into him, and they start thinking about what MacArthur does for a living. Remember, he's a landscaper, so he has access to hundreds of clientele, hundreds of front and backyards all over Canada. There was this one particular residence, though, that they find he frequented even several times a day, and this was 53 Mallory Crescent. The owners were good friends with Bruce and his family, and he stored his tools there since he lived in an apartment. So I guess it was like a favor, like, oh, you take care of our yard and you need this extra space, so you can just keep all of your tools here. So this was a place that he frequented often. And they decide to go to 53 Mallory Crescent. They take a team and cadaver dogs, winding their way through the property, front, sides, and back. But there's no signs of disturbed earth, and for some reason, the dogs keep coming back to these 15 huge planters throughout the property, like planters that you would put trees in. But it's January, it's freezing cold, so everything inside these planters is frozen solid. But you can see videos of these cadaver dogs like jumping on top of the planters and like trying to dig. So this is enough for investigators to gather up all of these planters, load them into a truck, and take them back to forensics for processing. So they x-ray these planters, and the first thing that they see is a human rib cage. They would eventually find the remains of 7 victims, 2 of which police didn't even know about. Award-winning journalist Mabeen Azar would later say, quote, he would move the body parts around in those plant pots. He would sit amongst those pots and eat his lunch with his victims. It was bizarre and grim and massively disturbing, end quote. MacArthur was soon charged with the murders of Hamed Kaihan, Sarush Mahmoudi, and Dean Lisowick. Mahmoudi, who we have not talked about yet, was a 50-year-old man living in Scarborough, Ontario. He was a refugee from Iran, similar to several of the other victims. He was married, and he had been reported missing by his wife in April of 2015. Police had investigated his disappearance, but he had never been connected to the men missing from the gay village. Lisowick was a former addict and had never been reported missing. He was living on the streets, staying in shelters in Toronto when he could. He survived by getting money from people off the streets through sex work. In February, Bruce MacArthur was charged for the murder of Skanda Nevaratnam. In April, he was charged with the murder of Basir Faizi. And just a few days later, he was charged for the murder of an 8th victim, a man named Karishna Kumar Kanagaratnam. Kanagaratnam had arrived in Vancouver on a cargo ship in 2010, one of hundreds of Sri Lankan refugees fleeing the war. Kanagaratnam had claimed asylum twice, and both times he was denied. So he fled to Toronto to escape deportation and was living underground in January 2016. He worked odd jobs for cash, and then he would send his money to his family in Sri Lanka. He also contacted his family weekly, but eventually the phone calls stopped coming. And with Kanagaratnam's status hiding underground, it's not like his family could report him missing. His remains were only identified after police released a forensic sketch to the public. So at this point, police have found remains of 7 of Bruce's 8 known victims. They have not found the remains of Hamed yet, but they had enough evidence to charge him for Hamed's murder. And of course, police also have to seriously consider the possibility that there could be dozens more victims' remains scattered throughout the properties of Bruce's landscaping clients. In May of 2018, the snow has melted, and police sent cadaver dogs to all of the properties on Bruce's client list. Luckily, they find nothing. And in July, police returned to 53 Mallory Crescent to search the backyard again. The backyard empties into this ravine and park. There's a bunch of land. And after digging for about an hour, police find human remains in a garbage pail that would later be identified as Hamid's. So now the remains of Bruce's 8 known victims are all accounted for. For 9 more days, police would continue to sift through the dirt at 53 Mallory Crescent. They found more human remains every day. They dug, but police would later say they have no reason to believe there are more victims. So I would assume these are further remains of the 8 victims, just how they had been, scattered. And obviously we don't know this for sure, but that's what it sounds like. Police also looked into the homeowners for any potential involvement, but they were ruled out. And I did read an article about the people who live there. As far as I know, they still live there. They were basically saying in the interview that they didn't want Bruce McArthur to win and them to just sell their home because of this tragedy. So it's this elderly couple, and they continued to stay there. So back to Bruce McArthur. It is widely believed that McArthur killed most of his victims in his apartment. So I mentioned earlier the roommate was a question mark for me. For those of you who are like me and very perplexed by this deranged case, you may be wondering how a man could kill so many victims 19 floors up in his tiny apartment without his roommate suspecting a thing. According to an article from The Globe by Nick Westall, a forensic expert determined McArthur moved and mixed the body parts after the remains had already been decomposed and skeletonized, which would indicate McArthur had to have kept the remains either at some unknown second location or in his apartment until they skeletonized, which is a lot like Dahmer. That's what Dahmer did, and he had a similar MO. And I strongly believe if Bruce McArthur wouldn't have been caught, he would have had more victims. If he kept the remains in his apartment, the question is, how did his roommate not smell that? And a lot of this is still not known, largely because there was no trial. So I'm not blaming the roommate. He could have traveled a lot for a living. I don't know, but it is something, that I thought was interesting to mention. There was no trial, though, and Bruce McArthur pled guilty on all 8 counts of first-degree murder on January 29th, 2019, carrying an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Justice John McCann says McArthur can serve all of his time concurrently. Bruce McArthur is now in prison, but many people have understandably strongly criticized the work of the Toronto Police Department, especially the work that they did on these earlier disappearances, saying that they actively downplayed the disappearances and dismissed the community's concerns of there being a serial killer in the gay village. Retired Ontario Court Appeal of Justice Gloria Epstein completed an independent review of the investigation, along with a review of the investigations for Alora Wells and Tess Ritchie, the 2 other victims that I mentioned earlier that also disappeared and were found dead in 2017. And this independent review cost millions of dollars. You don't just do reviews like this because you think police did a great job. So her over 1,000-page report, Missing and Missed, was released in April of 2021 and was quite blunt, with Epstein saying, quote, "The police could have done better." The report also included 151 recommendations for how Toronto police could improve their relationship with the community that they were supposed to protect and serve, and their missing persons investigations process. The report noted serious systemic deficiencies in the way that these investigations were conducted, including the mishandling of Mark Henderson's case at the time of his attack and after. When it played no part in later investigations, Epstein found this particularly troubling. Additionally, Epstein found police prejudice played a large part in this case, as later victims were given less attention or priority. The review also stated the failure to check MacArthur's criminal background when first interviewed in 2013 resulted in a lost opportunity to identify him as the killer. Quote, MacArthur was obviously very persuasive. He disarmed others as to his true evil. End quote. Also, some of the other sources that I read mention that it seems like most of the really good police work was done in 2017. And this was after Andrew Kinsman disappeared, the one victim who didn't look like the others, a white man. By pleading guilty to possession of a deadly weapon and assault, MacArthur also ensured that the trace he left in the system was faint. So this is talking about like all the earlier assaults, how he would always get in front of it. He would, confess, quote unquote, but he would spin this narrative. And by confessing in the way that he did, he was able to keep himself under the radar. Had he faced more intense charges, like aggravated assault, case management would have been mandatory, and the details of his crime would have been entered into a police-wide database. Perhaps if police had been more diligent when interviewing MacArthur, they would have prevented several other senseless murders from happening. Toronto police have gone on record saying that they're committed to implementing all 151 recommendations that were given in this independent review, but whether or not these have been implemented is yet to be seen. And of course, implementing these 151 recommendations could help the people of Toronto in the future, including people in the LGBT community that frequent Gay Village. But none of these recommendations can undo the harm that has already been done. MacArthur lived a secret life and victimized vulnerable communities, gay and bisexual men, many of whom were minorities and closeted, several that lived more transient lifestyles, refugees, sex workers, and of course, people whom society often labels as disposable. The Gay Village was a close-knit safe space for many people, and MacArthur destroyed that. Like many other serial killers, it's pretty terrifying that MacArthur was married, a father, a grandfather, and beloved by many. He was a mall Santa Claus, so we can't forget the hundreds of children who sat in his lap year after year, telling them what they wanted for Christmas. What leads a person to take another human life is something that I will never understand. Their motivations, their thought process, their end game. But one cannot deny stories like this are always horrific, enraging, and perplexing. And that is the horrifying story of the serial killer, Bruce MacArthur. And I hope that the victims of this monster are resting peacefully. I hope that Mark Henderson is doing well. I hope that the families have some peace despite not having a trial. I cannot imagine experiencing something like this. And there's just a lot of unanswered questions still. But yeah, there you go, everybody.
If you guys are still listening, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that Christmas marathon. If you did, be sure to let me know. Drop a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify, you can also comment on this exact episode. And I would just love it so much if you continued to tell people about the show. Leave a 5-star review wherever you listen. And I just want to wish all of you a happy holiday, whatever you are celebrating. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. That will be happening soon. And I will talk to you guys next week. Bye. Perplexity, a mystery podcast, is hosted, written, and produced by me, Kaydra Brannon. This show is proud to be a part of the Black Cat Network. Assistant editor is Charlie Leopold. Assistant producer is TJ McRae. Theme song by Patrick Thompson. Music for this episode is from Pixabay. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a story to share or a topic request, email perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. Contact, support, and merch links can be found in the episode description. And you can always unlock early and ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content by joining the Perplexed Society at patreon.com/perplexitymysterypodcast. Until next week, stay curious.